LGBTI Conversations would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia, their diverse heritage and knowledge. We pay our respects to all Australian Indigenous people, their culture, and their elders, past, present, and future generations. Sydney WoldPride 2023, we're going to be doing some extra conversations over the next 3 weeks. So make sure you get your downloads every week during Sydney WoldPride 2023. And make sure you participate in Sydney WoldPride. There's literally hundreds of things for everyone to get involved with. Get your tickets, get out there and support. Australia will show the rest of the world how to party. Now on with the show. On today's show, we speak with one of Sydney WoldPride's creative directors who also graduated from NIDA, who was the creator behind the Darwin's first ever Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander multi-art festival, and was also involved in the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Welcome to LGBTI Conversations, Ben Graetz, AKA Miss Ellaneous.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, you're born and bred in Darwin, Northern Territory in Australia. You're a proud First Nations man. Can you tell us a bit about growing up and your mob in Darwin?
Sure. So I was very fortunate to have grown up on the beautiful lands of the Larrakia people. I have a long history there. So my family, my mum and dad were born there as well, to have very big and very lovely ties to Darwin and the Northern Territory. And my mum's of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander descent, and my dad is of German, English, Irish. And my mum's family comes from Daly River, Malak Malak, also from Arnhem Land in Coburg and Badu Island on the Torres Strait.
And Darwin, for anyone who hasn't been, quite a unique part of Australia. It's quite diverse as well with the people that actually live there. When I went many, many years ago, and I've been back many times since, I was really surprised about the diversity of people living in Darwin itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. As you mentioned, it's a very unique place. I mean, I love it. It's obviously what I've grown up with and what I know. Very coastal, all along the coast. It's only 2.5 hours from Indonesia, and in particular Bali. So, and very close to Timor-Leste. So, we have incredible Asian influence up there, and also quite a tolerant and supportive community of the LGBTIQA plus community, which is really special. There's 1 million drag queens up there. And where I kind of got a lot of my work working at Throb nightclub, which is the gay nightclub up there. But, very fortunate to have grown up there in a place that is so, tolerant and diverse and, really laid back and really all about nature, which is really beautiful.
And it's funny you say about Throb. I was blown away in this area that you think that wouldn't be like a LGBTI friendly gay nightclub. And like places like Newcastle, we don't even have one here. But then you go to Darwin and you don't expect it. And there's this nightclub and it's amazing. It blew my mind.
Yeah, and I'm not joking by saying there's like 1 million drag queens up there. There's a lot of drag queens and kings, I should say. And I think that's also what makes it such a unique place. And accepting of our community is that there is that visibility quite present. And because it is a small place, you get to know everyone really well, and they also become your allies as well. So it becomes a safe place like that. But obviously, like all places, there can be incidents and there is always homophobia in places around our country. But I would have to say, generally speaking, particularly within Darwin, it is quite tolerant. And
how did you find coming out whilst you had your background? As I was saying before, you're a proud First Nations man, and in a smaller town like Darwin, although it's very diverse, you still face those challenges as well, finding out who you are as a person.
Oh, absolutely. And, I'm 45 now. So when I was growing up, it was the early 80s and going into the 90s in my high school years. And back then, there wasn't a lot of visibility for our community. And I think a lot of the visibility that was out there was very much on the HIV epidemic and, a lot of that kind of fear brought into our community. And stigma and all of those types of things. So it was really difficult to understand what it meant to be a queer person growing up in the 80s and 90s, and particularly in a small town like Darwin, regional town like Darwin. And so it wasn't until I left really and went and pursued my passion for the art. In Perth, I first moved and then came to Sydney where I studied for 3 years at NIDA. So I didn't really come out to myself even until I had moved away from Darwin because I didn't really understand it, you know. And it wasn't until many years later that I returned and actually took that journey of coming out to my family and being really comfortable. And as I mentioned before, performing in the gay nightclub up there. And, you know, but between those years, there was a lot of work done around visibility. And, you know, we had shows like Ellen and, you know, publicly people coming out and kind of accepting it. So, yeah, back when I was growing up, it was a very different journey, but also very proud that I was able to go back and be comfortable with my sexuality and back in Darwin.
I am the same vintage as you, so I do understand there wasn't the internet, there wasn't many shows even on television at that time, and as you said, the AIDS pandemic was still happening around us all. So that was all playing, and so there was no positive influences out there at that time, or not many, and especially if you grew up in regional areas. I also grew up in a regional area, so you couldn't just step out and go, "Here, I'm fabulous, hello." Yeah,
exactly, and all the stuff we did see on television was really derogatory. So it was really, you know, hard to be able to reconcile that with growing up.
So what did Michael Leslie help you with after school?
That's when I first moved away from Darwin when I was 17, and I'm able to attend the Aboriginal Musical Theatre program, which was a part of WAPA, which Michael Leslie started. So basically that course was all about really training young First Nations people into the skills and all the different elements of the performing arts, dancing, singing, acting, all of those things, and obviously had a passion for it all through school. So it was a really great opportunity, one, for me to leave Darwin, but also to pursue my passion for the arts. And I'm so grateful for those times. And that's when I met people like Stephen Oliver, who we're still very close friends with, Tamahi King, who is now Constantina Bush, and Ursula Jovic. A whole lot of First Nations actors and performers came out of that ACPA, that's what it was called.
And that seemed like it was a pretty special time during your life too, and also to have that opportunity to go to Perth, experience another city, and also pursue a bit of a dream.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, that time in my life will be always hold a special memory in my heart and mind, particularly because, I did get to meet so many different people that I'm still very close with now. And because of that, it's why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I got into NIDA and the kind of all the other events that happened after that time in 1995.
So in age 19, you did move to Sydney to study for NIDA. That must have been a bit of a culture shock going from even Perth to Sydney.
Oh, absolutely. And it was, as you mentioned, a big step for me to go from Darwin to Perth, let alone from Perth to Darwin to Sydney. But I was very lucky that I was able to live with my auntie and uncle in South Coogee when I first moved to Sydney. And my auntie, I think, had an inkling that, I was a young, queer, shy, reserved boy from Darwin, and would always, leave the Sydney Star Observer or the gay mags around the house or in my bedroom. And I always remember when she took me to her hairdresser, which was on Oxford Street, and took me there and she said, go and go for a walk and meet me back here. And that moment was really one of the moments that really changed my life, because as I kind of explored or stepped onto Oxford Street, I was kind of hit with this sense of belonging and seeing same-sex people holding hands and kissing, and they were on posters and billboards, and it was one of those moments where I was like, it felt like home, or like I felt right, I suppose. I felt I was at the right place and I felt at home.
You found your people, in other words.
That's right, yes. And I mean, the journey from there was I had to still study and do what I did, and I was very focused on my study, but then I let my hair down a little bit from, once I graduated from NIDA, and that's when I really kind of came out and was really comfortable with exploring my sexuality and the good old gay life.
And it sounds like your auntie was pretty clued in to realise what was going on and actually kind of help you out with even leaving the mags around. That was pretty out there for that time as well. Because again, you know, we're talking mid-90s here, so it was still wasn't like today. So do you find within the Aboriginal community, do they look at it a little different to other cultures, do you think?
Look, I think it's a really challenging, lots of different challenging perspectives, and that's really because of colonisation. I think that colonisation, and particularly religion, has really kind of affected the way that First Nations, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, are able to talk about sexuality and gender. But prior to that, we do know that with all First Nations cultures around the world, and particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mobs, is that there were definitely inclusion, and our community were a part of the wider community, and there is a great respect for different genders, and particularly American and Canadian culture, the two-spirited notion. And yeah, you just need to look at all the different various First Nations cultures around the world that do really have such great kind of respect and understanding about our LGBTQA plus sister girl, brother boy cultures. And yeah, unfortunately, due to the effects of colonisation, particularly in this country, is that has really kind of affected the way that we're able to talk about it, relate to it, and actually live it now.
And I do find that so fascinating too, as you were saying about the two-spirited. A lot of cultures out there actually celebrated the difference between someone being LGBTI, or what would be called today. Back then it was a completely different thing. Same thing, but different. And they saw them as a gift, someone special. And it is sad that, as you were saying, European culture over the millennials ruined it, because they took a completely wrong look at what was right about it. And it's interesting to say too, because when you go back with even the Europeans in like the 1920s and the 1930s and, you know, the early 1900s, again, there wasn't so much stigma around there. We lost our way as well during the 50s and onwards, or even the 40s. Yeah. And we just saw it as this hideous thing that should be stopped no matter what cost, which was really, really sad to see. And therefore they've passed it on to other cultures, and again, ruining their cultures with their opinions and, as you were saying, religion. And it's really sad to see.
And I think that, you know, something like WoldPride, we're really interested in having those conversations, particularly with all of our First Nations communities that are coming to Sydney WoldPride. And the reason why we have got such a big presence at the Human Rights Conference, but also at Marri Madung Butbut, which is our First Nations gathering space over 6 nights of carriage work, we're really interested in having these conversations and being able to talk to pre-colonisation. What did that look like? And how are we able to bridge some of those gaps that we have, particularly around the understanding and the documentation that came through colonisation, which we all know has come from a very white, cis male, heterosexual point of view. So even our queer history here in Australia is really skewed because most of the time was documented from white, cis, heterosexual men. So I think there's a lot to be learned, and I'm hoping that Sydney WoldPride will be a way to unlock some of those really great conversations and, you know, shining a light on history pre-colonisation.
And I think that's the thing, starting the conversation on all the topics is a good place to start, because we need to speak about it. And there's been a lot that has been done in the past and which wasn't right, but we need to talk about it and move forward and be united. Yeah. So it's good to see that WoldPride, it's a huge thing and there's so many exciting things to do, but there's also going to be some conversations that is a great space to have them and start the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to know that, you know, that a lot of what we are creating, and because we are working very closely with Mardi Gras, Sydney Gay Lesbian Mardi Gras, it's the 45th year this year for them. So, you know, a lot of the conversations, a lot of the things that are set up, there is an opportunity to carry that on into the future with Sydney Gay Lesbian Mardi Gras or through other organisations or community groups. I think Sydney WoldPride is really an opportunity for us to come together and ignite all of those great conversations well.
And with Sydney WoldPride, you are Festival Creative Director. There's over 300 events happening over how many weeks?
Well, it's 17 days, so I think it's just over 3 weeks.
Can you tell us a bit about what's going to be happening?
Yeah, so the festival starts on the 17th of Feb and goes through to the 5th of March. We have over 300 events happening all over Greater Sydney, and we also have an event happening in Newcastle as well.
We do.
Yes, exactly. Our Pink Salt, hosted by the fabulous Timberlina. And so, we've got a wide range of visual art, performing art, working with all the major arts institutions, as in the Opera House, Sydney Theatre Company, Belvoir, and also things like we're working out in Campbelltown and Parramatta. But yeah, we also have our Mardi Gras favourites that are back again this year, and the parade is going to be back on the street, which is very exciting. But as I mentioned, we do have quite a few First Nations activation shows and events as well, and ensuring that everyone is able to come to Sydney and be able to experience our queer culture and community here in Australia, but also be able to engage with the First Nations culture here, but also be able to enjoy this beautiful city and, as our CEO says, party with purpose.
Exactly. And one thing Sydney knows how to do is party. We've pulled off some pretty big things over the decades.
I would say that the queers know how to party.
Oh, we're too fabulous. Of course we do. Of course we do. Talking about parties, Sydney Olympics in 2000, you helped in the opening show. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so as a part of the Awakening section in the opening ceremony, I was fortunate enough to be a part of a team that worked on that. So worked very closely with Stephen Page and Rhoda Roberts. Ebony Williams, who is actually I'm working with Sydney WoldPride, we worked together as a part of that as well back in 2000. So it's a little bit of going down memory lane, but that was a really, once again, a moment in time that happens once, and then you have one opportunity, one time to do it, and I think it just really exceeded everyone's expectations. There was such a huge buzz in the city when the Olympics were on. I'll always remember that, always remember the Kathy Freeman moment. And I was very lucky enough to be able to dance with Christine Anu in the closing ceremonies as well with my island home. So experience the opening, the joys of during and then the closing ceremony as well.
And that was a great example of kind of coming together. We had the Aboriginal culture, but we also had our English, European heritage, and for them to come together and show the world or what we can do when we do work together was a pretty amazing time as well.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, it was a special moment in time that they'll always remember. And absolutely right. I don't think we've had another event like that. And I'm hoping that WoldPride can also be a moment in time that is very similar to that for our community, for our volunteers, for all of our artists and our visiting friends from abroad.
And there will be a lot of people from all over the world coming to Sydney to party with us. So it's a great example to put out there for everyone to see again. So I'm pretty sure with the work that everyone's doing, we're going to have a great party.
Absolutely. And we've been able to launch some of our WoldPride events, which are exhibitions which go for a couple of months. So I have already been to a few opening nights already, and I must say that the buzz at those events and in the city has already started. And I know that it's got me very excited and very much looking forward to 17th of Feb when it all begins.
And it's got me very broke because I've bought so many tickets. It's probably going to take a decade for me to pay them back.
Yeah, but you're going to have your memories, you're going to have your good times. And
that's all I'll have. I won't have any money.
No.
Now, in Darwin, you done the first ever Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander multi-art festival. What was that all about?
Yeah, so GARRMALANG Festival is a festival that, I was the inaugural one, which happened in 2014, I think it was. And really I was working as a creative producer at the Darwin Entertainment Centre. And really that was born out of the need to have a major Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander festival, specific festivals that celebrated our culture and the Northern Territory and our artists, and because that had never happened before. So started that because I do love festivals. It's one of my passions. I just love to be able to bring people together and celebrate our art and culture and all the great things, particularly about the Northern Territory and Darwin. And so I just saw that, there was a niche in the market, and very proud to say that that festival is actually still running. So it's grown each year, and obviously the last few years have been a bit challenging, like everyone, but a couple of successful festivals during and last year as well. So the GARRMALANG Festival happens every May in start of the dry season, which is our good season. I shouldn't say our good season, I should say our winter season, which is not really our winter season, up in the Northern Territory.
It's all a little bit backwards up there. You escape to the NT when you want to avoid winter down south.
Yes, exactly.
And then I always have friends come from the NT in their wet season because they want to avoid that. So it works out well.
It does. My plan is to do that, like 6 months in each.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do too, and that's the advantage of having such a big country. The climates are completely different, and therefore you can migrate around and never have a winter or a wet season.
Exactly, that is true.
Now, we're going to talk drag now, which is pretty exciting. Everyone loves a good drag queen or a drag king. Tell us a bit about the journey and the birth of your drag name.
Yeah, so Miss Ellaneous was born on my 25th birthday. So if you do the math, that's like 20 years ago now. Yeah, was born on my 25th birthday and had an incredible time. I was here in Sydney, and really the name came from when I used to work at Coles, my first job in Darwin, Coles Casuarina, and I used to work on the checkout, and it was back when the scanners, just showing my age again, were first coming through. The person behind the register had to scan all the items. It wasn't like now where the customers scan your own items, but it was when, if things didn't scan properly, you had to type in a code. And there was this A4 folder with all of the codes in it, for batteries and bread and everything. And it just used to take so long because back then things weren't scanning because it was new. And so I just memorized the number for miscellaneous, and I just used to put all of the items through as miscellaneous because it was quicker and faster. And when I was creating miscellaneous, I thought I want to create a miss something, like misunderstood or miss. And I think there was a misunderstood back then. So I was like, what else is there? Miscellaneous. And I was like, I didn't know any other miscellaneouses back then. And I was like, that's quite appropriate because of my story and because of what drag is. And it stuck.
Brilliant. That makes so much sense. So do you remember when you first done drag?
Yeah, so when I first done drag, it was at my 25th birthday at a house I lived in Glebe, and I remember borrowing a wig from my friends Pauline and Jill, I think a dress from one of them. My good friend Ado did my makeup, or Pauline or Jill did my makeup. One of my friends did the makeup. Tried to put down my eyebrows. Look, I would have looked hideous, but I think that I felt $1 million. And I remember doing Whitney Houston because that was my idol. It's my first number. And of course it was a huge hit. And then from then just kind of dabbled in it. I never really did it professionally. And then my drag mum, Catherine Gorge, who's from Darwin, taught me how to do my makeup. And then Marzi Panne, who's my business partner now, also gave me some tips because she was doing it quite regularly. And then, because back in the day, like we talked before, YouTube and all of that, you had to learn from someone because you couldn't just look at a RuPaul tutorial or any of that. You had to actually learn from someone. So I learned from them, and then just started to get a bit more corporate gigs and format friends parties. And then, as I mentioned, when I moved back to Darwin, I was asked to perform at Throb, and I worked there for 7 years and then built my kind of brand and reputation, and worked really hard, and I'm really proud of where I am now with it.
Unstoppable force now.
Well, look, tired, unstoppable force. It's still lots of fun, and I do love being able to share the joys of miscellaneous with the world. And
do you like the freedom of when you put that on, the outfit on, can be anyone you want to be?
Yeah, I think that there is a sense of freedom when you do drag, but for me there's also a responsibility. Like, I do take it very serious. I do know that I am very respectful to representing women and the female form, and so as a cis man I am very grateful and honoured that I'm able to do that. I love my mum, my grandmother and my great-grandmother were huge role models for me. So when I do drag, it is a huge honour, and I do really respect that. I'm very grateful to be able to do to do what I do. But also as an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander drag queen, there is a political message to it as well. And you're able to, I think, push the boundaries a bit more when you're in drag. You can get away with a bit more. I say to people we're like court jesters or clowns, where we're able to, or a puppet really, where puppets can kind of get away with things that you wouldn't be able to if you weren't dressed up or had a mask or did those types of things. So it's a way for me to be able to communicate, to connect with people, to tell a message, but also have fun, bring people joy. I think drag queens have always been people in our community that are entertainers, and it's about, entertaining and sometimes taking the attention away from all of the hard things that we have to deal with, particularly in the First Nations community, can sometimes bring some light relief. And I think that's always positive.
So true there. And I think it's quite important, as you were saying, you have a responsibility there. You just can't go around sassing everyone. Those drag queens, They can be quite fun, but it runs pretty short, pretty quickly. And admittedly, every time I've semi-dressed up in drag, I've become that sassy, horrible drag queen, and it's like I don't think I'd make a good drag queen, because I just find this sassiness all of a sudden and sass everyone.
Yeah, and I think some people do that, and particularly if you want to make a living from it and kind of build your reputation and be able to get more work, you do have to work really hard on that, and you definitely won't get that if you are just constantly sassy and being mean to people.
Yeah, you might get away with it once or twice, but then you have no customers left or clients, and game over.
Exactly.
You became a air hostess, correct word, air hostess or air host?
Flight attendant is what we use these days.
So what was the day-to-day like being a flight attendant?
Oh, look, it can be a really hard job, and I think people don't actually see that all the time. And I mean, the training that we had to do, I think we had to train for 6 weeks. And a big part of that is your emergency procedures, because particularly Qantas does take that very seriously. And it is very full-on training. And if you don't pass your test and all of your exams, then, you're out. And because they do pride themselves on having such a great safety record, there is the great moments of being able to travel the world. I think the other big thing for me was being able to connect with so many of the passengers. I really loved hearing people's stories, and everyone on that plane had a different story and journey, and I think that used to fascinate me a lot. I did love connecting with the passengers and hearing their stories, but it also is a very taxing job in terms of the jet lag and being able to live with that, which was hard as well. But all in all, it was an incredible time in my life. I did it for 7 years, but really missed being creative and being in the creative sector. So that was one of the reasons why I left flying and then went back into the art.
And then also you had involvement with the airline themed parties. They sounded fun.
Yeah, so Party Passport is a business that I started with Marzi Panne, who I mentioned, Daniel, and we have another business partner now, Adriana. And we've been running that business since 2014, a while now. And we've run the Miss First Nations competition pageant as a part of that. And the very popular documentary Black Divas came out of that first pageant as well. And also we run the Northern Territory float at Sydney Gamers in Mardi Gras. So have been doing that for the past, I think, 6 years as well. So a big part of it really was being passionate about the Northern Territory and creating events up in Darwin that our community were able to go to, and might have been a little bit different to the people that didn't want to go to Throb or be in a nightclub scene. We offered, site-specific events and different types of events that our community were able to engage with. So obviously a bit on the back burner this year with Sydney WoldPride, but looking forward to running more events post Sydney WoldPride.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Now, if you could go back and tell your younger self anything, what would it be?
Oh, look, I think it's just about don't be afraid. And I think like a lot of us, that's all going to be okay. And I think that's really hard when you are growing up and you are a small queer person from a regional place, to be able to know that and to be yourself, to take risks, and it'll all be okay.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Ben, thank you so much for coming on LGBTI Conversations.
No, thank you for having me.
If you love listening to LGBTI Conversations, make sure to follow. This will help other people find us much easier, and also make sure that you never miss out on an episode. Thanks for listening to LGBTI Conversations with me, Anthony Doik.